You think you're free because nobody can tell you what to do. That's oftentimes what we think as soon as we turn 18. But not all prisons come with guards or locked doors. Sometimes for men, they come in the form of father wounds, unresolved pain, or a hunger to belong. You see, I ran away from the man that raised me only to become an adult and not even recognize who I was. You've come to part two of my testimony, one that you don't want to miss. Hello and welcome back to the Godly Alpha channel. It's your boy Coach Wulu, and I am so glad that you guys are back with me again to hear part two of my testimony entitled Bitterness Blossoms the Rebellion Years. So, where we left off in my testimony last time, I had talked about how, one of the things I was thankful for that happened in my father's house was that he took us to church. That was one of God's Roman 8:28, making all things work together for good moments for me. But I want to pick up where I left off and kind of begin to segue from the early part of my testimony and kind of tell you the final years living with my father before I departed his household. And so you see, what ended up happening around that age is, I did not have, I didn't realize, better yet, let me say that I was dealing with a lot of stress. I didn't understand what stress was, what trauma was, what depression was. But those were some of the things that I was experiencing, and I didn't quite know how to, how to understand what it was that I was going through at that age. And so because of all of the stuff that I was going through, naturally I got into a lot of trouble. So just kind of, if for those of you who are maybe just kind of coming into my testimony kind of late, you know, where we are kind of in my story, I definitely want to tell you to go back and watch part one so that you don't miss out on the 6-part series that we're doing. But right now I'm dealing with the part of my life where I live with my father from the age of 7 to the age of 12. And so that's the part of my story that I'm in. And so yeah, due to a lot of the stress and the trauma that I was experiencing at the time, I found myself, getting into a lot of trouble. It got to the point to where the school literally had a place in the office just for me, where I oftentimes would get sent. And I think they realized something was going on and they were trying to see if they could offer me some help. So, I started to meet with the school counselor on a regular basis, and nobody really kind of knew what was going on in my father's home besides me and my sister. And so that counselor was somebody I had begun to start to confide in about things that were going on in my father's household. And so, she wanted to call a meeting with Child Protective Services. And so what ends up happening is she calls a meeting between the school officials, Child Protective Services, and me and my father. And I remember we're all sitting in the room, and the the school counselor says, now you've been telling me some things in private, and I would like for you to share with us the things that you've been sharing with me that have been going on in your home. And I remember I remember at that moment that everybody in the room turned to look at me, including my father. And, you know, and so I began to downplay what was going on in my father's house because obviously, I mean, he's literally staring at me. He didn't quite know what the meeting was going to be about. And so as he's looking at me, I downplay it and I act like things weren't as bad as, as they were. And needless to say, that meeting didn't go anywhere. And you know what's kind of crazy? I kind of look back at that now as an adult, and I realize just how foolish that was for both the school officials as well as Child Protective Services to do that, because you put me in front of a man that I am afraid of, and then you tell me to tell you in public what I have told you in private while he's staring at me. And so anyway, I never forget leaving the school and being on my way home, and I'm like hugging the door because I knew it was going to come sometime. And I think the quiet in the car ride home was more frightening than anything, because it was just like I just didn't know what was going to happen. And I remember getting back home, and um you know I, I I'm allowed to just go in the house, and I'm in my room, and you know I knew it was going to come sometime. I didn't know when, but I knew it was going to come sometime. And as I'm in my room, changing, my father comes in there, and he grabs me by the throat and slides me up against the wall. And I remember he slapped me so hard that he bursted a blood vessel in my eye. And so needless to say, that first attempt at freedom didn't go so well. And I think, you know again, this was only planting the seeds of bitterness that would only reveal themselves in rebellion as I continue to grow up. And there's a lot of science behind children with behavioral issues and experiencing trauma in the home. I want to read one of these to you from the National Child Traumatic Stress Network, and it says, children exposed to chronic trauma often show delayed emotional regulation, impulse control, and self-awareness. Emotional regulation. I mean, just talking about a child's ability to be able to properly regulate their emotions, or to control impulse, to be able to control their impulses rather than allowing their impulses to control them. And so, needless to say, some of the things that you're going to hear me talk about in my part of the testimony today, some of the source or the foundation for that behavior was because of the things that I had experienced as a child. But I really want to hasten to say this. A part of my healing, and I'm going to talk about this, later on, but suffice it to say now, a part of my healing and transformation came when I had to begin to start to realize, yes, what happened in my childhood may have laid the foundation, but as an adult, I realized I needed to take responsibility for remaining in that condition, because what I found myself doing for so many years was blaming what I was doing in my teenage years, my adult years. I was blaming it on all the stuff that happened to me. And true healing came when I was able to really begin to take ownership for where I was going to go from that point forward. And so So moving on in the story and kind of tying off, the rest of the years that I spent with my father before I moved out. I remember I was about 10 years old, and during during the 5 years that we lived with my father after we moved back in with him, after him and my mom had split. First we lived with my mom, then we moved back in with him because of the trouble we were getting into when we lived with my mom. You'll have to check out part one if you didn't hear that part of the story. But so living with my father, I'm 10 years old, and during the time that we lived with my father, we had practically no contact with my mom at all. We weren't allowed to call her, and we really weren't allowed to see her. I think in the time that I lived with my father, we saw my mom maybe like 3 or 4 times in the span of 5 years. And the majority of those we actually had to sneak to actually do that. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been able to see her. So I remember one of the days I had a bad report card, which was something that something that was kind of typical. I just wasn't able to focus, and of course I didn't really have that good structure, in the home as well as it relates to that. And so I remember I had a bad report card, and I just was deathly afraid of what was going to happen when my father saw that report card. So I remember I'm walking with my best friend Billy. Shout out to Billy, my childhood best friend, known him over 30 years. But I remember me and him were walking, and I was telling him, I was like, man, I can't go home. I can't go home, man. If my dad sees this report card, I mean, it's like, I'm like, yeah, it's, you already, because he already knew what was going to happen, because he knew what was going on in my dad's house. And so I made a decision then at the age of 10 years old. I said, okay, I'm not going home. I said, I'm gonna run away. And I didn't tell my sister anything. And so I ran away. I went to his house, and from there I ran away. Now I'm gonna tell you what's crazy. This is just really the providence. It's really the providence of God. Now, I told you earlier that in the 5 years that I lived with my dad, I probably visited my mom's house um 3, 5 times, something like that. It wasn't very many in that 5 year span. I'm 10 years old. I've never personally driven to her house. So I literally did not have uh because I hadn't gone so frequently, I didn't really know how to get to her house. But I just started walking in the direction of where I thought the house was. And her house is about 10 miles from where my father's house was. Not very far in a car, but for a 10-year-old, I mean, that's like walking to another state for a 10-year-old. And so I remember that, um I just start walking in the general direction. And as I'm traveling, certain things that I've seen on our drive over there is I'm kind of picking it up, and I'm like, I think it's this way. I think it's this way. And what I really truly believe in my heart of hearts is that God really directed me, because I look back on that knowing that I had only been at my mom's house a couple times. And oftentimes kids, when you're driving in the car, you're not really paying attention to where you're going. And so I really believe it was nothing but the providence of God that brought me there. And so anyway, I left around two something, and there's a lot that happened in between. I got lost, but God helped me to get back on track. And I remember I finally make it to my mom's house by the grace of God. I get there. Um, and the house is burned down. And I didn't even know it. And I remember getting close to her house. As I was getting close, I was so excited because I'm like, man, I'm gonna be free. And I get to her house, and I see that the house is burned down. Now, because we didn't have a lot of contact with my mom. I had no clue that the house had burned down, and I didn't have her phone number. I had no way of getting a hold of her. And um, so I remember just heart sank. I walked to the nearest park, and I saw some guys playing basketball, and they were like, "Man, you're a little bit young, to be out here." By this time, I don't know, it's maybe like 9 o'clock at night or something like that. I know it's dark, and they're like, "You're a little bit young to be out here by yourself." And so anyway, they take me to their house, and they're teenagers. They're still living with their parents, and so they told their dad, and their dad came out and he talked to me, and I'm begging this guy to let me stay at his house and not to call the police, because I said, you just don't understand what's going to happen if not only my dad finds out I had a bad report card, but he finds out that I ran away. So needless to say, while I'm talking to him, the police pull up, and I felt so betrayed. But I look back as an adult and I realized, what was he going to do? He's going to let me live in his house for the next umpteen amount of years? No, of course he wasn't going to do that. And so, um, so needless to say, police took me back to my dad's, and you know, yeah, a lot happened, but what I can say is that night, I'm very thankful that when the police took me there, nothing happened. And I think that was just God, because I was expecting that something was going to happen when they brought me home. But, God really showed me favor. So moving along in my story, I'm my sister, who's 4 years older than me. She has just 1 year left before she's about to graduate. And, I tell my sister, I'm begging my sister. I was like, sis, don't leave me. I'm like, don't leave me here by myself. And, part of the reason for that, there were a number of different reasons, but one of the reasons is whatever, whatever punishment was going to be meted out, was going to be measured out. Even though she was older than me, because I was the boy, I was always going to get it far worse than she did, far worse. And so, I just knew that when she graduated from high school, that it was going to just be me. And I was really afraid of that. But my sister, she looked me dead in my eyes and she said, I'm sorry, bro. She said, when I turn 18, she said, I'm gone. So, so I graduate from sixth grade, and again, don't know how to regulate my emotions under a lot of stress, trauma, and getting into a lot of trouble. And so I hated my sixth grade because, not my sixth grade, but my elementary, because I felt like I know that they were doing the best that they knew to do, but I just felt like they really didn't understand what I was going through in the home. And rather than helping me, they were just kind of keeping the status quo. So I graduate from sixth grade, and me and a couple of my friends go back to my elementary school. That was going to be the end of elementary. The next year I was going to be going into middle school. And I remember we broke that school up. I mean, we did a lot. We busted windows, sprayed, painted, just a bunch of different stuff. And we thought we was going to get away with it. Somebody must have heard us, or saw us leaving the property. Either they heard the windows break in and they saw us leave the property, and we went to a nearby park. Not too smart, but it ended up working out, as you'll see in the story. And as we're there in the park, I remember seeing, after we were there, I don't know for how long, an hour or something, and I remember seeing a police officer walking through the park. He had parked his car on the other side of the park, where I guess maybe he thought maybe he thought if he just pulled up, he just thought we was gonna run. So he kind of parked in a place where we couldn't see, and then he started walking across the field, and I didn't see him walking across the field until he was about halfway. And so anyway, he pulls one of us aside. It was about four of us, and he pulled one of the guys that was with us aside, and he started talking to him. Now mind you, I'm 12 years old now, and I watched him turn that kid around, and put him in handcuffs, and I knew what was about to happen. So then he came and he handcuffed me, and at the age of 12, I'm being arrested for the very first time. And so he took us, we all got taken to the police station. And man, I'm telling you, I'm afraid, because I'm like, when my father finds out that I, that I got arrested, I'm like, man, it's gonna be hell to pay. It's gonna be serious. And so I remember them trying to call my dad, and they couldn't get a hold of him. And I mean, they tried calling him a couple times. Couldn't get a hold of him though. And I'm very thankful that they didn't leave a voice message. And I remember saying to them, I said, call my mom, call my mom, call my mom. I said, my mom will come and pick me up. Now, by this time, I knew my mother's number. And so they called my mom, and praise be to God, she came to pick me up. And the police told her, they said, your son is going to have a court date, and that he will need to appear at, and he's going to need to show up for that. And so they told me to be on the lookout for a letter that would come in the mail. And that was it. Now, luckily, because they didn't get a hold of my dad, and of course my mom wasn't going to tell my dad. And luckily for me, providentially for me, I had the responsibility in my father's house for checking the mail. That was my responsibility. And so I remember with fear and trepidation, week after week after week, I'm waiting for this letter to come. I'm waiting for this letter to come. I'm waiting for this letter to come. And finally, about 2 months after I get arrested, I finally see a letter that says, Superior Court. And, I grabbed the mail, and I remember at the time my he's showering for work, but I don't know if he is out of the shower at that time or not. I just remember I took the envelopes, and act like I went to the trash to drop something off in the trash, and I threw the letter in the bushes. And I came back in, and matter of fact, if I remember correctly, I feel like it was my father who told me to check the mail. And so anyway, I came back in the house, and I give my father the mail. My father goes to work. I pull out the mail out of the bushes, and I see that I have to be at court August 3rd, 1996. I'm 12 years old. And so I call my mom, and let her know the time that I got to be at court. And I said, listen, so my dad can't know about this. And of course she knew. So she took me to court. Court was going to be I think 2 or 3 weeks after that or something like that. So she took me to court, and I remember sitting with my mom as we're waiting to go into the courtroom. And I just remember telling my mom, I was like, listen, Mom, listen. I said, if they don't let me go home with you today, legally, I'm like, I can't go back to my dad's house. I said, I can't. I said, for him to find out I got arrested and then I hid it from him, I'm like, I'm like that's going to be serious if he finds that out. And so anyway, we went into the court, and the court heard, um, I was able to share. My mom was able to share stuff that was going on in my father's house. And I never forget, man, I'll never forget. He said, "You can go home with your mama." And I'm gonna tell you, I've never felt like it's almost like I could feel the feeling now. That feeling of freedom. I felt so free and so relieved that I wasn't gonna have to go home that day. Um, but I also did feel a little bad because I knew I left my sister behind, even though she was about to leave me behind as soon as she graduated from high school. But I beat her to the punch. Um, but anyway, but I did feel bad for her because I knew she was going to get the talk of her life. So anyway, I think this is just an important um, point to just point out. You see, if you remember from part one, I said, my mom's parenting style and my father's parenting style were polar opposites. My mom was, you know, not that she didn't have any rules, but she had a whole lot less rules than my dad. A whole lot, there was a whole lot more freedom in my mom's house. And as I said in part one, sometimes too much. And in my dad's house, it was the exact opposite. Exact opposite. So in moving with my mom, I thought that I was free. But what I thought was freedom from rules, freedom from control. What I thought was freedom was really slavery because I was already allowing myself to be mastered by addictions at that age, bitterness, and suppressed rage. And so even though I was free physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, I was still in bondage. The Apostle Peter puts it like this in 2 Peter chapter 2 and verse 19. They promise them freedom while they themselves are slaves of depravity. For people are slaves to whatever has mastered them. You see, whatever the world promises us, oh, just get rid of religion so that you can be free. Get rid of the rules. Get rid of God's law and you'll be free. But you don't really end up free. You really end up a slave to your passions, a slave to your vices, a slave to trauma, a slave to whatever it is that Satan will use to seek to control you. And the only true freedom that you'll ever find is when you give those things over to Jesus. But at the age of 12, I just wasn't there yet. And so continuing on with my story, so I move in with my mom, and the trauma is further solidified because my mom's boyfriend at that time totally rejected me. He had his own children and he wanted nothing to do with me. And he let that be known. And so that was only like reinforcing the broken male models that I already had in my life. That was only reinforcing that. And so just to back up a bit, before moving into my mom's house, running away from my dad's, my dad didn't know anything about this, but I started smoking cigarettes when I was 10 years old. And, there were different reasons, you thought it was cool, right? And, my friends were doing it. And by the time I move in with my mom, by the age of 12, it started off with marijuana. Started doing marijuana. And then I started at 12 to begin to drink. And So drinking and smoking weed by the time I was 12. And I'm going to tell you, that was what I thought was freedom. I'm like, I'm free. I'm free to do what I want to do. Not even knowing that I was forging my own chains that would bind me for years. Because, I mean, I started drinking at 12, but by the time I was 15, I was low key an alcoholic. I mean, we drank, I drank so much. And you may wonder, how did you get alcohol at that age? I mean, me and my friends, this is back when it used to be really, really easy to steal liquor from grocery stores. But we would just go in, and this is before they had them behind the locked aisles. And we would go in and we would steal big bottles of vodka and all kinds of different stuff. Entire case. This is back when they used to have the whole case of cigarettes on the shelf before they put it in behind locked doors. We were still in multiple cartons with multiple, bottles of alcohol. And, at the age of 12, I mean, we would drink and we would smoke. So by the time I was 15, like I said, I was low key a drunk. Like, I remember the older homies would they would pit me against their friends because they knew I would outdrink them. Like, that's how, because I had an extremely high tolerance for alcohol. And so anyway, but what I was really doing in all of that, was really burying my pain. That's what I was really doing. I was just burying my pain. I was burying the depression, which really started around that same time as well. And I was just self-medicating. That was my way of self-medicating, and it started with that, and it continued to advance to other things. I remember there was a guy who used to come over to my house, and Spanish dude. I had a lot of Spanish friends growing up, living on the West Coast. That was it was a real normal thing. And I remember he was the first person to introduce me to cocaine. And because me and him used to smoke weed together. And I remember he came over the house one day and um he's like, "You don't got no weed?" I was like, "Nah, I don't got no weed." He said, I got something we can do." And he pulled out some cocaine, and that was my first time trying cocaine. And it was just, there was just a lot of experimenting with drugs at that time, from LSD to lots of different things. And again, I'm just self-medicating at that time. Around the same time, because I don't know who I am. I'm trying to figure out who I am. My older brother is locked up at the time, doing a 2 year stint. And uh and I'm trying to figure out who I am. I'm trying to figure out what it means to be a man. And so I'm getting into all of this stuff, and I really don't have any structure or guidance as to, the course of action that I should take as a young man at this time. And so I find myself around this time getting jumped into my first gang. And I look back on it, you know, both gangs that I ended up being in. One was in the first neighborhood that I was in, and a number of years later, I ended up moving to another area which didn't have that gang, and so I ended up joining another gang. I look back on it, and what it really was a sense of belonging. You know, um, a sense of feeling like you're a part of something, that you are quote unquote valued by people. Even though, truth be told, I look back on it and they really didn't value you. They had you running licks, they had you beating people up. But as soon as you get locked up, you ain't getting nan letter from one of them. and but it was satisfying the need that I had at that time, and it was a need for belonging. So around this time, man, I'm gonna tell you, God is so good because He, in the midst of your mess, He's seeking to create as many as opportunities as He can to draw you to Himself. So I remember that the same church that my dad used to take us to, um, even after living with my mom, I used to still go up there, but I didn't go there. Unfortunate to say, I didn't go. I didn't go to church because I was looking for Jesus. I went to church is because there was a lot of pretty girls there, and so and of course, I had friends there, and so anyway, so there was this guy. If you're watching this, shout out to Robert Brennerman. Shout out to him. Shout out to Robert Brennerman. Because during the time that I lived with my mom, I remember there was a season of my life where he sought to begin to try to start to mentor me. And he was about, I think, I don't know, Robert. He's probably about, I don't know, maybe 19, 20 at the time, something like that. And I remember he used to take me to church. He used to take me out to eat, sometimes buy his shirt or something like that. And I don't think he'll ever know how much that meant. I don't think he'll know how much that meant to have a man in my life that was taking an interest in me. And so anyway, those things were helpful. Those things planted seeds. But because the seeds of bitterness were much further along in their growth stage than these other seeds that God was trying to plant, the seeds of bitterness just kind of overshadowed the seeds of goodness and grace that God was seeking to bring into my life. And, just before I really move from this section, I just want to say to men out there, and women too, but this is a channel for men. I really want to talk to you, and I just really want to stress the importance of mentoring other young men that are in your sphere of influence. You never know what those young men might be going through. You never know what those young men may be struggling with. And when they see another man taking the time to invest into them, however small it may be, it does something for them, especially if they're going through their own home troubles. You literally may be the only Jesus that person sees. You literally may be the only male role model that young man is seeing. And so something that's extremely important, and I really believe that in the midst of my mess, God was seeking to insert Himself in the middle of it because he already saw that I was in a downward spiral. And I really thank God for that. Now, it's it's amazing how God how He works. I'm about to transition to another part of my story, another part of my testimony. Before I do, I just want to say, my mother passed about 6 years ago. And boy, a mother's worth. My mother, she wasn't a practicing Christian. She didn't pray. She didn't read the scripture at night. None of that. But she always tried to make sure we materially had the stuff that she didn't have growing up. And for that, I am thankful. I am thankful for that. But definitely the absence of Christianity in her home, the you know, some excess freedom that we had, and the fact that, my mother, God bless her memory, she wasn't a very emotionally um, present person. She wasn't the kind of tuck you in the bed, read you a bedtime story and kiss you goodnight and say I love you. That wasn't my mom, and I didn't understand that as a child until I got older. That she didn't know how because she didn't receive it herself. But what ended up happening is I ended up having two parents that were not emotionally present. And as a result, that stunted my growth mentally and emotionally. And, you know, those type of things, they have an effect on you. And especially for men, not having a father present in the way that he should be, those things have an effect on you. I want to read this statistic to you. It says 90% of homeless and runaway children and 85% of youth in prisons and 71% of high school dropouts come from fatherless homes. That comes from the National Fatherhood Initiative. And you see, those stats are not just stats. For some of us, some of the men out there, myself included, those are not just stats. Those are our stories. And so I said it in the last video, and it really bears repeating, that for a lot of us men, in order for us to move forward, we need healing in our origins. Not in our actions, but in our origins. Because if we find healing there, if we can find healing there, it then becomes a healed foundation which you can build upon. So, moving on to my story, as I begin to wrap this up. So my mother, I remember as I'm starting to get into trouble at her house, because I'm still on probation from what I had did all those years before, and breaking up the school, and I live with my father. And I remember I came home late one day, and my mom, I don't know what time it was, 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night, something like that. And I remember my mother said to me, she said, you're not a grown man. You can't come home whenever you want to. And I remember saying to myself, oh, really? And I left. And from the age of 14 to the age of 18, there were almost whole years where my family wouldn't know where I was. I was gone for 4 years, pretty much from 14 to 18. I was on the run, and I would go through this cycle of being on the run for maybe 8 months, 9 months, 10 months, year or whatever. Then I'd get caught by the police. I'd get locked up in juvenile detention. I'd get out of juvenile detention. I'd be with my mom maybe a month or two or so, and not wanting to live by any type of rules whatsoever, wanting absolute freedom. And then I'd run away again, and I'd be gone again. And it's sad to say the heartache I'm sure I caused my mom during those years, because she didn't know if I was dead or alive. But during those years that, I was on the run, I don't have the time to get into everything that happened during those years, but I'm going to tell you that it was only the providence of God that kept me during those years, because I'm 14. It's not like I'm old enough to have my own apartment. And so I'm living wherever I can, wherever I can. And sometimes those were drug houses, because that was just the place I was able to stay. Sometimes it was park benches. Sometimes it was sneaking into a friend's house and sleeping in his room without his parents knowing. There's one family in particular, I did that for months, and the family never knew, because I'd always come into the house at like 11 o'clock. I would sleep in the older son's room. I'd come into his room like 11 o'clock at night when his parents are sleeping. By the time I would wake up, his parents were already at work, and then all I had to do was be out of the house by like 2 p.m. And because that's about around the time they were going to be coming home, and I would just do that over again. But of course, they caught me, and so I found myself in so many different places. And I remember one of the nights, talk about the providence of God. I remember one of the nights they found me in his room, and they kicked me out. And I remember me and my friend Adrian, we're walking to the store, and I'm gonna tell you something before I tell you this part of the story. I really believe the devil knows when God has a calling on somebody's life. He knows it, and he will do whatever he can to try to snuff somebody out. So I find myself with my friend Adrian walking to the gas station, and I remember I see this bald-headed, Caucasian guy, and he's just dogging me. He's just mean mugging me. I say to him, I said, "What you looking at?" And I remember he just pulls out a gun and he points it at me. And in my stupidity, I said, "What you gonna do with that?" I said, "You don't got the guts." Pulled the trigger. And luckily, by the grace of God, rather than it hitting me, it hit something behind me, and the dude took off running. Would you not believe that 30 minutes later, a completely different person, I get a gun pulled on me. 30 minutes later. And the enemy was trying to snuff me out that night. But oh, for the grace of God. For the grace of God that preserves us even when we are in our rebellion. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. And even though I did not realize it then, just how much God was watching over me. Even when I tried to kill my purpose in life, mercy would not let me die. I'm going to say that again. Even when I, self-sabotaging myself, tried to kill my purpose, tried to kill my life calling, mercy would not let me die. And I'm thankful to God. And that is a part of the reason why I'm sharing my testimony, because the only reason why I am here today is because of him. But the work wasn't done. I still had a lot of brokenness I needed to heal from. And I really didn't know Jesus. I didn't know God. I didn't have an identity. I hated myself. I remember during those years, I was really living by the have-nots. I always thought everybody was better than me. They had better clothes, they had better this, they had better that. And I found myself wanting to be everybody else but myself. It took years for the Lord to break that and to heal me and realize there's something unique in me that he's placed. Something unique about me that's valuable. and that I was diminishing my identity by trying to be somebody else that I wasn't created to be. So, in closing, I want to share 8 takeaways. 8 takeaways that I want you to consider. The first takeaway that I want you to consider is bitterness untreated becomes rebellion unchecked. Let you think about that for a moment. Bitterness untreated becomes rebellion unchecked. See, the bitterness from what happened to us in our lives, if we don't allow the great physician to treat the root issue, it will lead to rebellion that is unchecked until the bitterness is healed. That's point number one that I want you to think about. Point number two, takeaway that I want you to think about is this. Trying to prove your worth outside of God only deepens your wounds. It only leaves you more scarred. When you try to prove your value or your worth outside of God, you are only going to inflict more wounds on yourself. Number three takeaway that I want you to consider from my testimony. False freedom is choosing chains that look like liberty. False freedom is choosing chains that look like they're free, that look like liberty. You look like you're free, but you're really in chains. It's a false freedom until you find the liberty that can only be found in Christ Jesus. Another takeaway that I want you to consider, and this is a difficult one for a lot of people. No, it was a difficult one for me. God doesn't need your perfection before you come to him. He just needs your permission to take away, heal, and transform the things that are the source of your problems, your unforgiveness, your anger, your bitterness. See, a lot of us think that we got to have it all together before we can come to Christ. But I'm going to tell you right now, you will never have it all together until you come to Christ. Because he's the great physician. Only he can heal. Only he can deliver. Satan has so successfully told this lie to so many people that I messed up so bad, I can't come to Jesus. That the devil is a liar. If there was ever a lie, go back and read Romans chapter 5, which tells you that when we were yet the enemies of God, Christ died for us. Go back and read Romans chapter 8, that nothing shall be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus, which includes your sins, my friends. If you will come to Jesus and let him take the pain, let him take the trauma, let him take the difficulties that you have gone through in life. If you will let him take it, heal it, and transform it into something for his glory and for your purpose. Let him awaken purpose in your pain. Last point that I want to share with you is, you may have gone through a lot in your life, but if you survived, you were preserved for a purpose. God's not finished with you, my friends. God is not finished with you, my brothers. If you've survived up to this point, he has preserved you for a purpose. And if you will come to him, he will reveal what that purpose is to you. I want you to be left with this final reflection. Where is it in your life that you maybe have mistaken rebellion for freedom? Is there an area of your life that you think, oh, I'm so free to do this, but it actually really has brought you into slavery? Maybe it's unforgiveness. Maybe it's some vice that you're still holding on to. Whatever it is, identify it. What area in your life have you mistaken a rebellion for freedom, but it is actually really slavery? Last reflective question is, what wound are you still carrying that is silently running your life? What wound are you still carrying that is silently running your life? Is it unforgiveness for the person that hurt you as a child? Is it, anger at the way that somebody treated you? It's going to continue to run your life until you let that thing go. If this video was an encouragement to you, then I would like to ask for you to share this video with somebody else that you believe that needs it. And if it's something that's been encouraging to you and you're declaring today that you either want to begin walking in freedom or you want to continue walking in the freedom that Christ has given you, I want you to put the word freedom in the comment section. And if you need somebody to talk to, you need a listening ear, and you would like to talk with me, then send me a DM. Send me a direct message with the word heal, and I will do my best to try to connect with you and help you on your journey. Well, fellas, it was a blessing to be with you guys today. And I really am thankful that you joined me on this journey. I mean, it truly, 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 truly has been a blessing. And I hope you will tune in for part 3 of my testimony, which will drop next Friday. Until then, may you be blessed, and salute to all my fellow brotherhood that is on the battlefield of manhood. It's time to rise up, godly alphas. The time is now. God bless. Deuces.